So your dog lost a third of its brain. I mean, literally.
Yeah, it sounds like a weird internet rumor, but it is entirely scientifically accurate.
Like if you look at the majestic, ancient wild wolf that your golden retriever descended from, and you do the actual anatomical math, evolution literally deleted over 30% of your dog's brain mass.
Right. And the crazy part, the truly fascinating part, is that it wasn't some kind of biological mistake.
No.
No, that massive loss of cognitive hardware was actually a highly strategic upgrade. It's what allowed them to completely conquer our world.
Boom. Right into the deep end today. I love it. So welcome to another deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here. We have a really fun one today.
We really do, because the mission of today's deep dive is to basically decode the secret biology and the psychology of man's best friend.
The domestic dog.
Exactly. Because if you look at the dog sleeping at your feet right now, or, the one dragging you down the sidewalk by its leash, it feels like the most ordinary thing in the universe.
Oh, absolutely. They are completely normalized in our society.
Right. I mean, we feed them, we let them hog the bed, we feed them our dropped French fries, we buy them those ridiculous little winter sweaters.
Which they probably don't need, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. But when you strip all that cute stuff away and look at them through the strict lens of science, domestic dogs are deeply weird, profoundly mutated creatures.
They are walking biological contradictions, honestly.
Hmm.
And the only way to actually decode them is through a very specific scientific discipline.
Which is called ethology. I've always loved how that sounds. It sounds like the study of ethics, but it's totally not.
Not at all. Ethology is the study of innate behavior, the hardwired stuff.
Right, like what an animal is born knowing how to do rather than what it learns at obedience school.
Precisely. It looks at behavior as a physical evolutionary adaptation. It's like a sharp claw or, thick fur.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the absolute golden rule of ethology, the main engine of the entire field, is that it is fundamentally a comparative science.
Comparative, meaning like you can't just study a subject in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
You can't just stare at a pug and figure out why it's violently scratching the living room carpet.
Exactly. If you watch your dog spin in, 3 perfectly concentric circles before it lies down on a completely flat memory foam dog bed.
Which looks totally ridiculous, by the way.
It looks utterly ridiculous. There is no logical reason for a dog to do that in your living room.
Zero reason.
So to understand that behavior, ethology dictates that you have to compare the domestic dog to its wild, untamed relatives.
You have to look at the animals out there surviving in the brush.
Right. Dealing with tall grass and snakes and unpredictable terrain. You have to trace the family tree to see where the physical instinct to flatten the grass before you sleep actually came from.
So to understand the weird little alien living in our house, we have to figure out who its actual relatives are.
Which is step 1.
Right, which sounds super simple. But as I was going through all our sources for today, I realized that the dog's family tree is just a chaotic mess of misleading labels.
It is highly convoluted, mostly because humans are just terrible at naming things.
We really are.
We rely on everyday common names based purely on what an animal looks like,
Yeah.
which completely obscures the actual genetic reality.
Okay, so let's untangle the genetics then. Because in biology, we're talking about systematics, the grand categorization of life.
Yes.
And the domestic pet dog has the official scientific tag Canis familiaris.
Right, and that first word, Canis, is the genus. This is the crucial classification here. In evolutionary biology, the genus Canis represents what we call the true dogs.
The true dogs. Okay, I picture this like an incredibly exclusive VIP group chat on your phone.
A group chat, I like that.
Let's call the chat the squad. So to get into this specific genus chat, you have to be genetically practically identical, right?
Yes, you have to be so closely related that your chromosomes align almost perfectly.
So who is actually in the Canis group chat? Who makes the cut?
It is a very tight-knit group. First and foremost, you have the wolf, Canis lupus.
Okay, the classic.
Then you have the coyote, Canis latrans. Then you have the jackals, specifically the golden jackal, the black-backed jackal, and the side-striped jackal.
3 types of jackals, got it.
And finally, you have the Australian dingo.
Okay, so that's the squad. Wolves, coyotes, jackals, dingoes, and our pet dogs.
Correct.
But here is where my own research ran into a bit of a wall, and I have to push back a little on this exclusive club idea.
Oh.
Yeah. What about the other wild dogs out there that act exactly like our pets? Like the African wild dog, for instance, or the doll hole, the red dog over in Asia. Or the Ethiopian wolf.
Ah, right.
Because they hunt in packs, they have complex social structures, they even sneeze to make group decisions. They feel incredibly dog-like.
They certainly do feel dog-like. And they are part of the broader Canidae family. They are canids,
Okay.
but they are what we consider distant cousins. They are not in the genus Canis.
So they are in the massive, chaotic family reunion Facebook group, but they aren't in the private squad text chat.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it, yes. Genetically, they split off from our dog's specific lineage millions of years ago.
Wow. Millions.
Millions. So the reason they share those complex social behaviors, like the pack hunting and the deep communal bonds, is entirely due to convergent evolution.
Meaning they just figured out the same survival tricks independently.
Exactly. They faced similar environmental pressures as the true dogs, so they developed similar behavioral solutions, but structurally, genetically, they are far removed.
Which brings me to my absolute favorite example from the sources of how completely useless common animal names are.
Let me guess.
We have to talk about the man-eared wolf.
Ah, the maned wolf. A magnificent creature and just a taxonomic nightmare for the layperson.
Seriously, if you are listening to this and you haven't seen a picture of a man-eared wolf, you need to look it up immediately because it does not look like a wolf at all.
It really doesn't.
It looks like a giant, bright orange fox that got a hold of some radioactive material and sprouted legs that are like 4 feet long. It's literally a fox on stilts. It is bizarre.
Well, it lives in the grasslands of South America, so those long legs are actually an amazing adaptation for seeing over the tall grass.
Right, which is super cool. But local human populations looked at this tall, reddish creature, saw it had a snout and teeth, and just said, yeah, let's call it the man-eared wolf.
A classic naming error.
And the problem is if you're an amateur ethologist, you hear the word wolf, and you immediately think, oh, it must be the uncle of my pet dog. It must be in the Canis group chat.
And you think, let me compare my dog's behavior to this thing.
Exactly.
And if you did that, your behavioral analysis would be catastrophically wrong.
Because its actual scientific name is Chrysocyon. It's not Canis anything.
Not at all.
It's a total imposter. It's using a fake gamer tag to sound tough online.
It really is. It represents a completely distinct evolutionary lineage. And if we connect this to the fundamental mechanics of ethology we discussed earlier.
The comparative stuff.
Right. This is precisely why scientists insist on Latin nomenclature and rigid systematics. You cannot draw behavioral parallels between a golden retriever and a maned wolf just because they both have the word wolf or dog associated with them in plain English.
Because they aren't actually related.
You would be comparing the psychological instincts of an animal shaped by the frozen forests of the Northern Hemisphere with an animal uniquely adapted to the South American savanna.
That makes total sense.
The mechanisms driving their behaviors are entirely alien to one another.
Okay, so the group chat is locked. The Canis genus is secure. We know our dog's closest relatives are wolves, coyotes, jackals, and dingoes.
Yes.
But that instantly creates a massive historical problem. If all these animals are in the same genetic room, which one of them actually gave birth to the domestic dog.
And you have just articulated the central premise of one of the most fiercely debated, longest-running arguments in the history of zoology.
The origin of the domestic dog.
The ultimate biological mystery.
The ultimate who's the daddy puzzle. I loved reading the history of this because scientists basically split into two warring factions for decades over this.
They absolutely did.
So let's lay out the battle lines. On one side, we have the monophyletic theory, and on the other, the polyphyletic theory.
Let's strip those terms down to their basic mechanics for a second.
Mm-hmm.
The prefix mono means single, and phyletic refers to evolutionary lineage.
Okay.
So the monophyletic camp argued that the domestic dog descended from one, and only one, wild ancestor.
And that single ancestor is the wolf.
Correct. But the opposing camp championed the polyphyletic theory, poly meaning many.
Right.
They looked at the sheer staggering diversity of domestic dogs, from the massive Mastiff to the tiny Chihuahua, and they argued that it was biologically impossible for all of them to come from just the wolf.
So they proposed a mixed ancestry.
They did. They theorized that ancient humans must have domesticated wolves, sure, but also jackals and perhaps coyotes, and over thousands of years, all these different canids interbred in our villages to create this big melting pot that became the domestic dog.
Which, honestly, it sounds totally logical. Like when you look at a Jack Russell Terrier, it frankly looks a lot more like a little jackal than a giant timber wolf.
Visually, yes, the argument makes sense.
But this is where the science gets incredibly rigorous and honestly super fascinating. The modern consensus, which our sources explicitly confirm, is that the polyphyletic theory is dead. It's just wrong.
Completely discarded.
Dogs are monophyletic. They come purely 100% from wolves. End of story.
And today, through modern mitochondrial DNA sequencing, that debate is entirely settled. But long before we could map the genome, early biologists figured this out using pure, hard comparative anatomy.
Oh, this is the brain stuff.
This is where we return to your opening statement about the incredible shrinking brain.
Yes.
Right.
Because they didn't just guess by looking at fur colors, they physically opened up the skulls. They looked at the actual organ volume.
They did.
So walk us through the mechanism of how scientists used brain size to completely destroy the jackal origin theory.
Well, it requires understanding the physiological cost of domestication. First, we have to establish our baselines.
Okay.
In the wild, different canids have different proportional organ sizes. When scientists measured the cranial capacity and the heart volume of a wild jackal, they found that a jackal has a relatively small brain and a small heart in proportion to its total body mass.
Okay, so a jackal basically equals a naturally smaller engine.
Precisely. Now look at the wolf. The wild wolf possesses an immensely large brain and a massive heart relative to its body size.
Because it needs to. Right. I was
Wow.
reading about the sheer cognitive load of being a wild wolf, and it's insane. A wolf brain isn't just like controlling breathing.
Far from it.
It's a supercomputer running intense geographic mapping software. It has to calculate wind direction, snow depth, the trajectory of a fleeing elk, the complex social dynamics of a 15-member pack.
Yes, all simultaneously.
And remember, the location of an obscure water source across a territory of 100 square miles. It is burning massive amounts of calories just to think.
It is an incredibly expensive organ, metabolically speaking. Brain tissue consumes a disproportionate amount of the body's energy.
Wow.
And in the brutal, unforgiving environment of the wild, that massive brain is a vital survival mechanism, so the caloric cost is justified. But then the wolf meets the human.
The ultimate game changer. The wolf steps out of the freezing forest and sits down by the human campfire.
And suddenly the environment changes entirely. The human provides the food. The human builds the shelter.
The human throws the spear to defend against rival predators.
Exactly. So that massive energy-draining supercomputer of a brain is suddenly totally unnecessary.
So they literally just deleted the heavy apps to save battery life.
That's a great way to put it. Evolution is ruthlessly efficient. If an animal does not need an organ to survive and that organ is draining precious calories, evolutionary pressure will slowly reduce it over successive generations.
Wow.
The parts of the brain dedicated to hypervigilance, complex spatial mapping, and acute predatory aggression simply weren't needed by an animal living off the scraps of human hunters.
And the numbers we have on this are just staggering. The sources explicitly state that during the thousands of years of domestication, the ancient wolves that became our dogs lost 34.4% of their brain mass.
Over a third of their cognitive volume simply vanished.
Which is wild to think about. But let's bring this back to the debate. How does this massive loss of brain matter prove that they didn't come from a jackal?
It's a simple deduction of scale. We know that domestication universally shrinks brain size. So if we look at a modern domestic dog today, even with its reduced, shrunken brain, it still has a larger brain relative to its body size than a wild jackal.
Oh, I see the math now.
Right. If you start with a wild jackal, which already has a naturally small brain,
Yes?
and you apply that 30% reduction that comes with domestication,
You would end up with a domestic animal whose brain is way too small to function at the level our dogs do. You'd have a dog with a brain the size of a walnut.
exactly. The math literally doesn't fit inside the skull. To get the modern domestic dog's brain volume today, you had to have started with something absolutely massive thousands of years ago.
You have to start with the wolf.
The cranial volume, the sheer physical space inside the skull, proved the monophyletic theory long before DNA ever could. The wolf is the sole ancestor.
Boom. Done. Biological mystery totally solved. But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. If the anatomical math is that painfully obvious, why did brilliant scientists 100 years ago fight so hard for the jackal theory? What were they seeing that confused them so badly?
This is where ethology reveals its blind spots. The scientists advocating for the polyphyletic theory were behavioralists. They were looking at how dogs act. Because while the anatomy screams wolf, the behavior of the domestic dog throws some incredibly bizarre curveballs. Dogs do some highly specific things that wolves simply refuse to do. But Jackals do them.
Okay, now we are getting into the messy behavioral stuff. What did these scientists see a dog do that made them think, ah, yes, that is definitely a jackal?
Let's discuss scent marking. Chemical communication is paramount for all canines. They read the environment through scent. Wolves primarily mark their vast territories using urine.
Sure, standard wolf behavior.
It's efficient, it's easily dispersed, and it carries complex hormonal data. But domestic dogs possess a behavioral quirk that wolves generally lack.
Which is?
Dogs frequently utilize feces as a primary, overt territorial marker.
Okay, hold on. You mean when my dog goes on a walk, completely ignores the flat grass, and decides to balance precariously to leave a pile of poop on top of the only large rock in a 3-mile radius?
That's a territorial marker.
Absolutely. The elevation of the feces helps the scent disperse on the wind. It's a deliberate, calculated behavioral choice.
That is hilarious. Now, wolves do not generally utilize feces in this highly specific, elevated marking manner. But you know who does?
Let me guess. The jackal.
The jackal. It is a cornerstone of jackal territorial behavior. Furthermore, early ethologists noticed incredible similarities in the specific physical postures of female dogs.
Like how they pee.
Yes. The complex, varied ways female domestic dogs squat and urinate to mark territory are behaviorally almost identical to female jackals and noticeably different from the more rigid marking patterns of female wolves.
So picture a scientist in, like, 1920. They don't have DNA scanners. They don't have perfect skull measurements yet. They're just out in the field with a notebook.
Right.
They watch a wolf, and the wolf doesn't poop on a rock. They watch a dog poop on a rock. Then they watch a jackal poop on a rock. It's totally understandable why they connected those dots and assumed they were related.
It's a perfectly logical but completely incorrect conclusion. It highlights how dangerous it is to rely solely on behavioral mimicry.
So they just got tricked.
We know now that those jackal-like behaviors in dogs are just mutations. When you shrink an animal's brain by a third and put them in an entirely unnatural environment like a human village, their wild instincts begin to fragment and mutate.
So they develop these weird, idiosyncratic behaviors that might happen to resemble a jackal, but it is pure coincidence. It's not shared DNA.
Exactly.
So the dog is just a heavily mutated, brain-shrunken wolf.
Correct.
But shrinking the brain didn't just alter their physical intelligence. It did something much, much stranger to their actual timeline of life. And this takes us to what I think is the most mind-blowing concept in our entire deep dive today. Let's talk about the Peter Pan syndrome.
Ah, yes.
Let's talk about neoteny.
Neoteny, or fecalization. It is arguably the single most important physiological and psychological concept to grasp if you truly want to understand why your dog behaves the way it does.
Neoteny. Okay, let's break down the mechanism here. What is biologically happening to an animal experiencing neoteny?
In evolutionary biology, neoteny is the retention of juvenile, immature features in the adult animal.
Meaning they look like babies?
Yes, but more than that. It means that as the species evolves over thousands of years, its developmental clock slows down and eventually the pause button gets hit earlier and earlier.
Okay.
The animal reaches physical sexual maturity. It becomes a biological adult capable of reproducing, but its physical appearance and, critically, its psychological state remain frozen in infancy.
They are biologically trapped as permanent babies.
Yes, they possess a state of eternal youth.
Okay, I have an analogy for this that I think perfectly captures the vibe of living with a dog.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you have a teenager, and this teenager hits 18, but instead of graduating, moving out, and getting a job, a biological switch in their brain just breaks.
Right.
They refuse to mature. They want to stay in your house forever. They want you to keep making their meals. They want you to schedule their doctor appointments. They want to play with the exact same toys they had when they were 5.
A very demanding teenager.
And their deepest desire in life is just for you to pat them on the head and tell them they are doing a good job.
It's a humorous image, but mechanistically it is entirely accurate. You are describing an organism that has permanently halted its journey toward social and psychological independence.
Because if we contrast this with their wild ancestors, the wolves they descended from, the timeline of life is completely different. Walk us through a wild wolf's puberty. What happens to a wolf brain when it hits 2 years old?
In the wild, maturation is a rigid, inevitable, chemically driven process. A wild wolf puppy is very much like a domestic dog puppy.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is submissive, it is playful, it relies entirely on its parents for food, warmth, and safety. It exhibits classic juvenile dependence.
It rolls over, it licks the parents' faces, it begs for food, all the cute stuff.
Exactly. But when that wild wolf hits sexual maturity, a massive hormonal shift occurs. The brain floods with hormones that dictate territoriality, aggression, and the drive to reproduce.
The switch flips.
The psychological puppy state completely evaporates. They're no longer submissive to their parents. They begin to challenge the pack structure.
Oh,
Their fundamental biology screams at them that they must become independent, leave the family unit, carve out their own territory, and start their own pack. They are compelled by their neurochemistry to become fully autonomous adult predators.
so they literally graduate, move out, and go to work in the forest.
They have to. Remaining in a submissive dependent state goes against the very survival mechanism of an adult wild canid.
But our domestic dogs, they just never get that hormonal surge. The alarm clock for adulthood never rings.
No, it doesn't.
They reach their full physical size, they get their adult teeth, but their brain just loops the "I am a baby, please take care of me" program until the day they die.
And this raises the most crucial realization for anyone listening who owns a dog. This neotenic state, this permanent psychological infancy, is the entire reason domestication is possible.
It's the only reason we can live with them.
It is the absolute prerequisite for keeping a dog in your house.
Because if a dog's brain actually hit that mature wolf switch, oh man.
The chaos.
The kick.
Exactly. Imagine you have a wonderful, goofy golden retriever. It turns 2 years old, and instead of remaining neotenic, its brain fully matures into a wild adult state.
Okay, picturing it.
The dynamic of your household would instantly shatter. The dog would look at you, the human who pours kibble into a bowl, and it would no longer see a parent figure it must submit to.
What would it see?
It would see a roommate, or worse, a rival.
Yeah.
It would say,
Yeah.
I no longer accept your authority over this territory. I am an adult apex predator. I'm going to challenge you for control of the kitchen, or I'm going to tear through the front door, run into the woods, and find a mate.
I'm not fetching that tennis ball, man. Get it yourself. And by the way, I'm taking the couch. It's mine now.
Yes.
It would be a nightmare. We literally rely on their arrested development. We need them to be helpless dependents.
That is the essence of what early humans did. As we lived alongside these ancient wolves, we didn't just select for dogs that had softer fur or floppy ears. We selectively bred for the individuals that retained their juvenile submissiveness the longest. We curated an entire species that is biologically incapable of growing up, so that they would look at us as parents forever.
It is honestly a little profound and maybe a tiny bit tragic. Like, we literally engineered a creature whose sole psychological purpose is to need us.
It's a complex ethical thought, certainly.
But that intense, permanent focus on humanity completely changed how their minds operate.
Yeah.
Because if you have a brain that is a third smaller than a wolf's and it's trapped in a permanent puppy state, how do you actually process the world?
Which brings us to the fascinating realm of cognition. How does a dog think versus how a wolf thinks? Because the assumption is often that because a dog has a smaller neotenic brain, it is simply dumber.
Right.
But that is a gross mischaracterization.
Yeah, dumb implies they just can't think. The reality is they just traded their skill points for a totally different skill tree, right?
Yeah.
They're smart in a completely different, highly specialized way.
Exactly. And the source material highlights this with a brilliant, elegant behavioral experiment that perfectly illustrates the cognitive divide. It focuses on the understanding of physical cause and effect.
The shaking can study. I love this one.
It's a classic.
Walk us through exactly how scientists set this up, because the mechanism of the test is what makes it so undeniable.
To test an animal's grasp of physical logic, researchers utilize a simple setup. They take an opaque container, say a plastic can, and they place a piece of high-value food inside it.
Like a piece of meat.
Yes, they seal it.
Yeah.
They must ensure that the containers are completely sealed so that the animal cannot simply smell the food. Scent would bypass the cognitive puzzle entirely.
Right, if they smell it, it's just following their nose. There's no actual thinking involved.
Precisely. The experiment relies purely on auditory and visual processing. A researcher stands in front of a wild captive wolf. The researcher holds the can and shakes it. The food rattles inside. Rattle, rattle. To a wolf, this is a basic, rudimentary physics problem. The wolf observes the researcher shaking the container. The wolf hears the noise.
Yeah.
In a fraction of a second, the wolf's brain uses logical deduction. A rattle indicates a solid object moving inside a hollow space. Therefore, the food I desire is physically located inside that specific container.
So smart.
The wolf immediately goes to the rattling can and attempts to open it.
They nail it. Because in the wild, an apex predator has to understand the physics of its environment. If a wolf hears a twig snap in a very specific patch of bushes, it has to know, logically, that the prey is in that exact bush.
Yes.
It can't just guess. It has to understand the cause and effect of the natural world.
Now, researchers run the exact same double-blind experiment with a domestic dog. The researcher shakes the sealed can, it rattles, and the domestic dog fails.
The dog just stares at it like, wow, magic noisy cylinder. Very cool.
They fundamentally struggle to make the immediate logical connection between the auditory stimulus of the rattle and the physical presence of the hidden object. The abstract physics puzzle eludes them.
So the wolf is the intense, focused nerd in the front of the classroom doing the actual rigorous physics homework. And the dog is just failing the test.
But the brilliance of the dog is what happens after it fails the physics test. When the dog realizes it does not understand the rattling can, what does it do?
It looks at the human.
It stops looking at the can entirely. It redirects its attention. It looks up and it makes intense, direct eye contact with the human researcher.
Because our sources clearly state that while dogs lost the ability to process wild physics, they specialized completely in reading us.
They became absolute masters of human social cues. And the ultimate proof of this is the pointing test. It is a cognitive benchmark in animal behavior.
Pointing. Which feels so insanely basic to us. I point at my keys, I point at the door. We do it without even thinking.
But in the animal kingdom, understanding a pointing gesture is practically a superpower. Yes, it requires complex, abstract thought. You have to understand that the extended appendage, the finger, is not the object of interest itself, but rather a directional vector communicating abstract information about a distant object.
You have to know I'm not just showing you my finger.
Exactly. Even our closest genetic primate relatives, chimpanzees, struggle immensely with the pointing test. And wolves.
Wait, what about wolves?
Even wolves that have been hand-raised by humans from the moment they were born, wolves that are totally comfortable around humans, will consistently fail the pointing test.
No way.
If you place a cup with food and a cup without food on the ground and point at the one with food, the wolf will just look at your finger. It doesn't process the social intent.
But the dog.
The dog aces it effortlessly. Without any training, a dog understands human pointing. They track our eyes. They watch the sclera, the whites of our eyes, to see where our gaze is shifting. They have evolved to read the micro-expressions on our faces.
So to finish my school analogy, the wolf is the nerd doing the physics homework. The dog is the kid in the back of the class who completely ignores the textbook, but they have brilliant social skills.
Right.
They smile, they make great eye contact, and they just perfectly copy all the answers off the human's test.
It is an incredibly pragmatic evolutionary strategy. The dog's genetic lineage realized, over thousands of years, that it simply does not need to understand physics if it can perfectly understand the human who controls the physics.
Wow.
The human is the ultimate tool in the dog's environment. Why expend caloric energy solving a complex puzzle when the human will gladly solve it for you, open the can, and hand you the food just because you made the right kind of soft eye contact?
I don't need to know how the doorknob works. I just need to know how to manipulate the giant hairless ape into opening the door. It is genius.
It really is.
But it gets even deeper than just reading our body language. The source material brings up a cognitive concept that I had to read twice to fully grasp: metacognition.
Metacognition is a high-level cognitive state. It is, quite simply, thinking about thinking. It is possessing an internal awareness of your own knowledge, knowing what you know.
And, more importantly in the case of dogs, knowing what you don't know.
Precisely. For a long time, critics argued that dogs looking at humans for help wasn't actually smart, it was just a conditioned reflex. But scientists proved that dogs possess genuine metacognition.
How did they prove that?
They ran experiments where dogs were presented with puzzle boxes. Some boxes were solvable, the dog could flip a lever and get a treat, but other boxes were rigged to be impossible to open.
So they gave the dog an unbeatable boss fight in a video game.
Yes. And when a dog is faced with an unsolvable problem, or, when a toy rolls under a heavy piece of furniture that the dog knows it cannot physically move, it doesn't just blindly, reflexively claw at it until it exhausts itself.
Right.
It pauses. It assesses the situation. The dog undergoes an internal cognitive evaluation and concludes, I do not possess the physical capacity or the requisite information to solve this problem.
It literally detects its own lack of information.
Yes. It recognizes a gap in its own abilities. And once it recognizes that gap, it strategically seeks out assistance to bridge it. And where does it look? It looks back at the human.
That is amazing.
This definitively proves that dogs are not mindless automatons running on simple stimulus response loops. They evaluate their environment, they evaluate their own limitations, and they strategically deploy their best available tool list.
That completely changes how I view my dog when its tennis ball rolls under the TV stand, when it stops, sits down, and just stares at me. It's not just a dumb, blank stare.
Not at all.
It is a highly calculated metacognitive request for technical support,
They have effectively outsourced their hardest problem solving to humanity.
which is brilliant.
It is. But as we move into the final phases of our analysis, we must address the cost of this outsourcing. Because dogs became so hyper-focused on human communication, and because they spent thousands of years not using their raw wild instincts, those ancient survival codes got completely scrambled.
Which brings us to mutated instincts. The bizarre behavioral glitches that happen when you take a wolf and put it in a living room for 100 centuries. And we have to start with the loudest glitch of all: barking.
Barking, the soundtrack of domestic dog ownership.
Why are they so incredibly loud? If you watch a nature documentary, a wild wolf pack is practically silent.
Generally, yes.
They howl to communicate over vast distances, sure, and a puppy might yip during play or a mother might give a low warning growl. But a wild wolf does not stand at a chain-link fence and rhythmically scream at a passing bicycle for 3 straight hours. So why do our dogs do it?
The scientific term our sources use is fascinating. They describe the barking instinct as having hypertrophied.
Hypertrophied, like a muscle that swelled up, it became massively overgrown.
Precisely. In the wild canid ancestor, barking was a microscopic, highly contextual behavioral trait. It was an alarm call used incredibly sparingly because making loud, continuous noise in a forest full of rival predators is a terrible survival strategy.
You just give away your position.
Exactly. But when dogs moved into human settlements, that dynamic flipped entirely.
Because humans actually want noise. If a bear or a rival tribe is approaching the camp in the middle of the night, a silent dog is totally useless to us.
Exactly. Early humans undoubtedly, perhaps inadvertently at first, selected for the dogs that made the most noise when startled. We rewarded the alarm bell,
I encouraged it.
and we provided them with complete physical safety, removing the evolutionary penalty for being loud. Over successive generations, that tiny, minor wild trait mutated and expanded until it became their primary dominant method of vocal communication.
Wow.
The rhythmic, continuous barking we hear today is an entirely artificial construct born of domestication.
We basically built biological burglar alarms, and now we are annoyed when they go off all the time.
That's the irony of it.
But barking is just communication. Domestication also shattered the most fundamental physical sequence a wild animal possesses.
The hunt. This is a classic textbook example of behavioral dissociation.
Okay, let's explain the mechanics of a wild hunt first, because it's not just running around randomly. In ethology, it's called a fixed action pattern, right? It's a chain reaction in the brain.
Yes, a fixed action pattern is an instinctive, sequential chain of behaviors.
Hmm.
In a wild wolf, the predatory sequence is hardwired and fluid.
Okay.
It generally progresses sequentially: eye, stalk, chase, grab, bite, kill, dissect, consume. Each step in the sequence acts as the neurological trigger for the next step. It is an unbroken chain.
And some of those wild, unbroken links are still totally visible in our pets. The sources mention the mouse jump, that adorable thing where a dog leaps up into the air and pounces down with its front paws to crush a small rodent or a squeaky toy.
Yes, the mouse jump.
Wolves do that. Foxes do that. Our dogs do that.
The basic ancient code is still right there in their brain.
The foundational code is present. But human breeding has engaged in a form of genetic sabotage over the centuries.
Genetic sabotage. We wanted dogs to assist us in hunting, but we did not want them to complete the sequence. A dog that hunts, kills, and eats the prey before the human arrives is useless to the hunter.
Oh, right. So we literally took a biological pair of scissors and just chopped up their fixed action patterns.
We created what scientists call dissociated hunting chains. We selectively bred dogs to execute the beginning of the sequence flawlessly, but we suppressed or entirely deleted the terminating actions.
And the most incredible example of this, which our text highlights specifically, is the pointer breed. In Czech, the OHA. If you want to see a glitch in the biological matrix, watch a pointer work a field.
It is a stunning display of arrested instinct.
Let's paint the picture for the listener. You take a pointer out into a tall grass field. The dog is in pure, intense predator mode. It is using its incredible olfactory system to sweep the air.
Following the scent.
Right. It locks onto the scent of a hidden bird. It executes the stalking phase perfectly, moving silently, creeping forward. The dog finds the exact bush where the bird is hiding. The tension is incredible. The wolf sequence dictates that the next step is the pounce and the kill. But what does the pointer do?
It stops. It freezes absolutely solid. It lifts one front paw, it extends its neck, and it points its nose directly at the hidden prey. And then it simply remains in that rigid posture.
It just stands there. It could be 3 feet away from a juicy pheasant and it won't bite it. To go back to our gaming analogies, it is literally like an avatar lagging out and freezing right before the final boss fight.
Lagging out, exactly.
The internet connection to the wild wolf brain drops completely. The program just hangs in a suspended loop.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Neurologically, the sequence has been artificially severed. The dog feels the intense burning biological drive to locate the prey, but the subsequent genetic instructions, the grab, the fatal bite, have been disconnected by human design.
So they're just stuck.
The dog is trapped in the point phase until the human hunter arrives to shoot the bird and end the sequence for them.
It's hilarious to picture a wild wolf observing a pointer. The wolf would be watching from the tree line going, "Dude, you found the food. It's right there. Eat it. Why are you just standing there pointing at it like a statue? You're embarrassing the entire Canis genus."
The wolf would be profoundly confused. But it perfectly illustrates how deeply, how fundamentally we have rewritten their biological code. We took the supreme apex predator of the northern hemisphere, an animal built for brutal survival, and we genetically whittled it down until it functioned as a living, breathing, furry directional arrow for humans.
A furry directional arrow. That is amazing. Which perfectly, flawlessly transitions into the final and unequivocally the most important point of this entire deep dive.
Ah, yes, the myth.
Because, despite knowing everything we just discussed, despite knowing that our dogs are brain-shrunken, neotenic, genetically glitchy, eternal puppies, we still harbor this romanticized macho idea of the wolf in our heads when we look at them.
We do.
And that specific misunderstanding has led to the most persistent, scientifically damaging myth in the history of dog training. Let's talk about the alpha myth.
The theory of dominance.
Yeah.
Yes. Our source material takes an incredibly firm, uncompromising stance on this subject, and it is vital that we address it extensively because the echoes of this debunked theory still permeate how millions of people treat their dogs today.
We have to dismantle this entirely. Let's set up the myth as people know it. For the last 50 years, if you bought a dog training book or watched a famous dog trainer on television, you heard the exact same speech.
Yes, the pack leader speech.
Right. Dogs are pack animals, descended directly from wild wolves. Wolves operate on a strict, violent hierarchy. They are led by a vicious, aggressive alpha male who constantly fights the lower-ranking wolves to maintain dominance and control over the pack. Therefore, if your golden retriever barks at the mailman, or pulls on the leash, or growls when you take its toy, it is because your dog thinks it is the alpha.
Which is completely false.
And the trainers would say, to fix the behavior, you must physically dominate your dog. You must roll it on its back. You must eat your dinner before you feed it to assert your rank. You must be the alpha.
It is a narrative that sounds inherently logical. It appeals to a certain human desire for control, and it is based on absolutely fundamentally flawed, broken science. It is, from an ethological standpoint, completely and utterly ridiculous.
Okay, if it's so wrong, how did it become the global standard for dog training? Where did the scientists get this alpha wolf idea in the first place? Did they just make it up?
They didn't invent it out of thin air, but they observed it under catastrophic conditions. The entire concept of the hyper-aggressive, constantly battling alpha fighting for dominance was codified by scientists in the mid-20th century.
Right.
Most notably, a researcher named Rudolf Schenkel in 1947, whose work became foundational. But there was a massive critical flaw in the methodology of these early observations. The scientists were not observing natural wolf packs. They were studying wolves in captivity.
Captivity, meaning zoos, enclosures, cages.
Exactly. The researchers took adult wolves from completely different geographic regions, wolves that were totally unrelated strangers to one another.
Oh, no.
They placed these highly stressed apex predators together into relatively small, confined enclosures where they could not escape from each other.
Okay, hold on. Taking a bunch of heavily armed, stressed-out strangers, forcing them into a tiny enclosed space they can't leave, and dropping limited food in the middle of them? That doesn't sound like a natural family. That sounds like a prison.
That is the exact perfect parallel. It is a biological prison riot.
Hmm.
Imagine if alien scientists wanted to understand normal human family dynamics, so they observed the behavior of unrelated inmates in a maximum security prison.
That would be a terrible study.
The aliens would watch the inmates form violent gangs, fight brutally over scarce resources, and establish a rigid hierarchy based purely on intimidation and physical trauma. If those aliens then wrote a scientific paper concluding the natural state of the human family is a violent gang led by an alpha warlord who beats the others into submission, they would be spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong.
They would be mistaking severe trauma behavior for normal family life.
Precisely. And that is exactly what the early wolf researchers did. They watched these captive, deeply stressed strangers battle for survival in an unnatural enclosure. They saw the biggest, most aggressive wolf win the fights, and they labeled that winner the alpha.
Wow.
And then, a few decades later, dog trainers read those flawed studies and applied that prison riot logic to our peaceful living rooms.
That is wild. It makes so much sense why the theory falls apart. So if the prison riot model is fake, what does the actual truth look like? When modern scientists like L. David Mech, who actually helped popularize the alpha term originally and has spent decades trying to retract it, when they go out into the vast wilderness and observe a real natural wolf pack, what do they actually see?
They see something incredibly mundane and beautiful. In the natural world, a wild wolf pack is not an aggressive fight club constantly jockeying for political power. It is simply a family unit.
Just a family.
A true wild pack consists of a mother, a father, and their offspring from the past 2 or 3 years.
Just a mom, a dad, and the kids.
That is the entirety of the structure. The so-called alphas are just the parents. They do not rule their pack through violence or intimidation or constantly pinning their children to the ground to assert dominance.
So how do they lead?
They lead simply because they are older, they possess the vital experience of hunting and navigating the territory, and they deeply care for their young.
So the younger wolves aren't submitting because they are terrified of being beaten up by the alpha.
Not at all. They submit to the parents for the exact same reason human toddlers submit to their parents, because they are the children and the parents are the providers.
Yeah.
It is a cooperative, deeply bonded family unit focused entirely on raising the next generation and surviving the winter together. There is no internal power struggle.
That completely shatters the entire foundation of dominance training. All of those aggressive techniques, the alpha roles where you physically pin your dog to the floor, staring them down, refusing to let them walk through a doorway before you because you have to be the pack leader, it is all based on a total misunderstanding of a prison riot, rather than how a natural family operates.
It is not just misguided. It is actively detrimental, especially when you synthesize this reality with the concept of neoteny we discussed earlier.
The permanent puppy state?
Remember, your domestic dog is not a mature wolf plotting a hostile takeover. Your dog is biologically frozen in a juvenile state. It views you as its parental figure. It doesn't want to overthrow you in a bloody coup for control of the sofa.
That's such a relief.
It simply wants to know what the boundaries are and wants to feel safe and secure within its family unit. Treating your pet dog like a vicious, calculating rival in a power struggle is scientifically absurd. It damages the incredible, unique bond that we've spent thousands of years building with them.
You don't need to be an alpha warlord. You just need to be a good, consistent parent. You just need to guide them. That is such a relieving, beautiful conclusion to come to after looking at all this complex science.
It truly is. It replaces a paradigm of antagonism and control with a paradigm of understanding, cooperation, and biological empathy.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We really took a deep dive into the muddy, complicated waters of ethology.
We certainly did.
Let's do a quick final synthesis of this wild biological journey for you, the listener. So here is the absolute truth about that dog sleeping at your feet. They are not part jackal, despite the fact that they insist on treating large rocks like personal bathrooms.
No, strictly wolf.
They are 100% descended from the majestic wild wolf. But they lost a third of their brain capacity. They literally deleted the heavy wild survival app so they could perfectly adapt to the ultimate ecological niche, your couch.
They are biologically frozen in a state of permanent childhood, which is the foundational reason they accept our rules and live in our homes.
They traded the ability to solve basic physics problems for the absolute superpower of reading human faces, tracking our eyes, and understanding pointing fingers. They literally outsourced their hardest cognitive tasks to us.
It was a brilliant move.
And because of that, their wild instincts are totally scrambled. They bark way too much because we wanted biological alarm systems. And their hunting code is so broken that a pointer will literally lag out and freeze instead of finishing a hunt.
A furry directional arrow.
And most importantly, they are not trying to be the alpha of your house. They just want to be a loved member of your family.
Understanding all of this profound biology truly changes how you perceive your dog. When you look at them now, you shouldn't just see a simple pet waiting for a treat.
What should you see?
You are looking at a magnificent, highly complex mashup of ancient, wild, predatory DNA and thousands of years of intense evolutionary adaptation, all designed flawlessly to exist right alongside us.
It is the greatest story of survival through friendship in the history of the planet. But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up, something that builds on everything we just discussed about how deeply they changed for us.
I am intrigued. What is the final variable?
Think about this. We just spent this entire deep dive detailing how dogs evolved over tens of thousands of years. We discussed how they fundamentally shrank their brains, how they biologically froze their own development, how they learned to read the whites of our eyes perfectly, and how they adapted their entire physical and psychological existence just to integrate seamlessly into our world.
Yes.
The dog completely changed its own biology for humanity. So my question for you to think about is this. If the ancient wolf changed that drastically to fit into our human world, how much do you think our human brains and behaviors secretly evolved over the last 20,000 years just to live with them?
Now that is a truly fascinating question of coevolution.
Did we domesticate the wolf, or did the wolf actually domesticate us? Something to think about the next time you catch yourself using a ridiculous, high-pitched baby voice while cheerfully picking up their poop in a plastic bag. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. See you next time.